Awesome, cool. Well, hi everyone. It's a few minutes after. Just wanted to give people a chance to come in because we did change the venue at the last minute. But welcome so much to our workshop. This is the first workshop of the 2025 season. We're doing a total of 4. So we're doing a workshop today, another in about 10 days on the 22nd, and then the next 2 are going to be in early December. So we hope to see you guys again. Thank you so much for being out here. You could have been everywhere or anywhere on a Wednesday night, but you're here with us. Want to give a big shout out to GCCI. Dave's not here, but they're our partner. Amelia and I are with Arizona Water Company, but GCCI has been the partner that helps make these workshops happen. They help book the space and everything, so we're really grateful for them. A few housekeeping things. Restrooms, there's one over there. You'll have to sneak by Brian to get to it, and I believe there's some over there as well. So if you need a restroom at any point, just feel free to get up and go. Spoke with Mary and she said that it's fine if you pepper your questions in as the presentation is going. So feel free. This is a pretty small group, so we can get our questions in. I hope everyone signed in because we are raffling off a few desert native plants today as a thank you and an encouragement to have you guys come back for a few more workshops. We also have some admissions to the Boyce Thompson Arboretum that we'll be raffling off at the very end of the workshop. So you might just walk away with something additional. Like I mentioned earlier, this workshop is going to be recorded. It's not live streamed, but it will be recorded and posted on YouTube later. So if you're like, oh my gosh, what was that great piece of information that Mary said? I don't remember what it was. You can go online and see it, or you can share it with your friends so that other people can get content. And then the final thing, the stuff that you have in front of you is available for you. We've got the 3 kind of standard water conservation packets. These are really awesome. If you ever want more of them, just reach out to us. This is all about how to water your landscaping, making sure that we're not overwatering. This is the tried and true plant guide. It tells you a bunch of information about desert adapted plants. And then this is just how to design, install, and maintain your own desert landscaping. As far as some of the paper that's here, if you want to follow our Facebook page for the program that put this on, that's what this little palm card is. These are some flyers about some rebates and different things that are available. And then finally, the last thing is just a survey. Please let us know how you felt like the workshop was today. Give us any feedback on future topics you want to come back and see a workshop on, and we will happily take that feedback and hopefully be able to provide you guys more resources. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Mary. Thank you.
Right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Villarreal. I work at Boyce Thompson Arboretum as the horticulture project manager. That just means that I get to do all the fun stuff. I work with our horticulture team on some of the big projects, kind of coordinating with the community and planning some of our big updates and improvements that are coming up. So I love what I do, but my background is I went to school at ASU for landscape architecture. I have my master's in landscape architecture. I know the workshop was billed as landscape architecture in the desert. I've titled this Arid Climate Landscape Design because I think it's very important to know that landscape architects are a licensed profession. It has to do with health and safety, and the design of our landscapes is not something to be taken lightly, and you can damage property and persons if you do things poorly. So a lot of what we'll be talking about today is kind of choosing plants, a plant palette, but some of that bigger stuff of like hardscape and grading and drainage, that's something you'd want to work with a professional on because they would have a license that would back up and certify that that work is safe in your home and community. And to move on, so for what we're going to do today is arid climate landscape design. The kind of 2 wings of the presentation will be review how arid climates inform the landscape, how plants are a reflection of their environment, and then look at some of the principles of design to inform yourselves on how you would like to influence your residential landscape and how it all comes together. I will do the first spiel of the Arboretum. I notice a lot of people here, I recognize you from the Arboretum, so I didn't know what kind of crowd we'll have today, so I'll make this quick because is there a show of hands of anyone who hasn't been out to Boyce Thompson? Oh yay, all right. This is the picture portion of the presentation. Just talking about what an arboretum is, a place where trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants are cultivated for scientific and educational purposes. I think it's really important to know that can I speak up for you, sir? Are you? No, I'm good. Okay. It's really important to know that at Boyce Thompson Arboretum, our mission is to educate. And the collection and things that we have there have a purpose as an outreach to our community. Going back to our founder, Boyce Thompson, or William Boyce Thompson, we are 100 years old last year, so 101. He was a mining magnate, and he came out to Arizona for the what's now the Resolution mine, but was then, I don't know, the Thompson mine? I forget what the name of the mine was at the time. Was it Magma mine at the time? Tom is one of our docents, so he knows a lot of details. The thing that I find interesting about Boyce Thompson is that he was an honorary colonel. So a lot of times you'll hear him called Colonel Boyce Thompson. And he got that honorary title from way back in like the 19-teens. He assisted with the Russian famine, and his monies and expertise in mining and railroads helped deliver some of the relief to Russia as they were recovering from their war. And he saw what that did to people and to a landscape that don't have a diverse food source. And that really became the crux of his philanthropy. He founded an institution in Ithaca, New York, that was really looking at plant science. And he founded Boyce Thompson Arboretum here in Superior, Arizona, that was looking at more of a laboratory of plant science, and specifically in this western United States that was, at the time, barely being populated. So he looked out onto the landscape and said, what were these people eat? And that was the kind of the impetus of the Arboretum. Just for those who haven't been there before, we are 22 minutes away and less than 22 miles. So if you haven't been out to the Arboretum, we're really accessible and on the highway. It's also important to note that we're just getting into the mountains. So the Sonoran Desert that we think of as the valley, we're in the foothills of the Sonoran Desert and almost on the cusp of the desert, where when you get kind of up to Oak Flats and over, you're getting into kind of semi-arid region and no longer defined as a desert. So it's nice to be on that transitional landscape because you can have and support plants from all over the world. These are some samples of the succulents we have on site: a boojum tree, a cardone, I think it's called a quiver tree, but it's an aloe. And they're from Baja, South America, and South Africa. Some other things we'll have collections from an ecogeographic region. So one of our largest collections is the Australian collection with the eucalyptus, grevilleas, bottle tree, one of my favorite, the blue bush. I can't think of its Latin name. Can you come to my safe? I don't speak Latin. You don't speak Latin. All right. We also are an arboretum, so we have trees from all over the world. We're part of a multi-site collection of oak trees. The Texas mountain laurel, which is beautiful in this photo, is probably about next week or the week after going to be popping in the Arboretum. They're already opening up, but then it'll be the big show. As well as in the fall, our Chinese pistache are able to kind of give you that fall color. And 100 years of growing trees, we got some pretty spectacular ones. And they support a lot of wildlife. And that's also kind of part of our mission is not only what our collection is, but all the habitat it provides, the phainopeplum, the cardinal, the hummingbirds, the vermilion flycatcher, all of these things the Arboretum is happy to host. And the other things we have is a lot of mammals and insects. The coatimundi were here all winter, or quite a bit of winter. They've disappeared for a little while. They're typically only in the lower elevations in the winter months, but recently we found they're with us for longer periods of time. The troop showed up in November this year. They showed up a little early, and they've just barely left, whereas last year I think they stayed maybe 6 weeks. the foxes that are around, the mountain lion that comes through, Gila monsters that we have about the chunkiest ones you'll ever see, and then the tarantulas and many, many butterflies. I'll do a plug for the Arboretum because this is the part of the presentation we're in. In the end of August, September, we're going to have an art exhibit on site, and it's called Glass in Flight, and it's a local artist from Tucson that are these giant sculptures that are mosaic glass, butterflies and birds and various pollinators. So if you guys are year-round residents, I encourage you to keep an eye out for that because I think it'll be really beautiful, and we're going to have a number of programs and educational things focused around the habitats of butterflies and hummingbirds. Going back to the mission of Boyce Thompson Arboretum, inspire appreciation and stewardship of desert plants, wildlife, and ecosystems through education, research, and conservation. A whole lot of words, but I think the important thing for tonight is we really want to inspire appreciation of desert plants and kind of a review of what their habitat is that has formed them, and kind of respect that when you start thinking about the design of your landscapes. So the first portion will be talking about kind of a review of how the climate informs the landscape, and a solid background in that understanding can help you choose plants when it comes time to design your yard. So some of you may recognize this because this is an info board that's out in the Arboretum right in front of Smith, and I've always enjoyed it. So what is a desert? A place where life is limited by lack of water. It's not a place with no water. It says it's a lack of water. And because of that, it really defines itself on how it stores water and keeps it, and the plants preserving what they receive. Another thing that I think, and there's a number of reasons why a desert forms: oceanic isolation, dry traps, all of that. The science of all of that can be found at the Arboretum on this info board, or on Google if that's of an interest. What I'd like to feature is, I guess we'll start here. So you see the equator line across this, and the deserts of the world tend to be above the equator and below the equator about the same distance. We're at 33 latitude, but we'll get to the point. But it's important to note that kind of all the deserts kind of end up on those latitudes in between. I'm going to skip to this one because I'm leading to it. This is the part that gives us seasons, and this is the part that's important to understand for deserts and arid. Because of the way the earth tilts, it's not straight up and down facing the sun, it's tilting at, I think it's 24 degrees, something to that effect. It means that when we're in our summer, and so we're up here, we're in our summer, the point that's at that 24 degrees, that Tropic of Cancer, is getting the full brunt of the sun. It's not getting an oblique amount. So, and that's why our summer sun is almost directly overhead, whereas elsewhere in the world it might be kind of down in the southern sky. And that just means we're getting a very concentrated hot sun. And so our ground is drying out. Our plants are getting extra heat, and then the earth wobbles back, and in our winter, the other tropic is getting that full concentration of sun. And anywhere between those two tropics, there's a time of the year where they have no shadow because that's where the earth is in the tilt at that point. And that's important to know, that at the hottest time of the year, we are getting that full concentration and we're really drying out. We're really evaporating. And if that happens to match a season that isn't getting rain, then you really have to plan for that. You have to plan for the worst of the heat and the sun and the long days. There's lots of terms, but arid means dry, and then semi-arid means kind of dry. But all of this comes up because the collection of plants that we have at the Arboretum and the types of plants that you can grow and care for in your home might be in any of these definitions. They might be from arid regions. They might be from semi-arid regions. And understanding a plant's origin helps you understand some of the care that you need to supplement for it. So an absolute native tree should not need any supplemental water, except if you have put it in a condition that it's not native to. So a mesquite tree is absolutely native, but it is normally growing in kind of a low spot that collects water, and it can send down its taproot, and it can survive in that hot summer because it's adapted to that. But if you put it in the middle of a highway where it has nowhere to go, it has nowhere to send its taproot down, one, it's going to fall over, but two, it doesn't matter that it's native. It needs supplemental irrigation because it's in a condition it can't naturally survive. So we can skip that. And I think the important thing is, and a lot of you I think have been around here long enough and appreciate it, but if there's any newbies, arid landscapes, just because they're dry, they remember water. And everywhere across the desert, there are plants that have the adaptations that they're showing and kind of have the marks and the scars of water. So when I look out at the desert, I don't see no water, I see the memory of water. And I think it's important to respect that cycle that the plants have adapted to. And this is the biggest problem we have in Arizona with people and their landscape. Do not overlove your plants. It's very tempting to give a little love every day to that agave, but it's not used to having its feet wet all the time. So it wants to get that really deep soak, save it up, slowly use it, and then have another soak again. And that's, I think that's an example of every plant in the desert if you kind of start to learn its story and learn its development. So we'll go through a couple ones really quick. The creosote has very small waxy leaves, and that makes it more difficult for the leaf to lose water by transpiration. Another thing it does is it will go drought dormant. You often see creosote in the landscape that's just gray and miserable. It's not dead, it's taking a nap because it doesn't want to be exposed to 110 degrees for 10 hours a day and actively trying to grow. So it just says, I'm gonna not grow for the next 4 months. And then when it has good conditions, it kind of actively grows. Another thing, a lot of the cactus, columnar cactus, that accordion shape it's just creating shade for itself. And even as it starts to lose water, what it's done is it's created deeper shade for itself. So as it's in more stress, it suddenly has this mechanism that's protecting it more. Something like the desert willow is a beautiful tree, native tree of Arizona, but it's also often seen in ephemeral washes. So it can sit in water. You can have a desert willow in, not that I advise this for anyone, but you can have a desert willow in a lawn because it can take deep watering. But it also is adapted and able to have those dried out periods between. It goes dormant in the winter so it can kind of regenerate. But when you see it in a landscape like this, where it's a little bit built up on that little postcard front yard, that's not the best condition for it because it's used to kind of sitting in the low spots to take advantage of ephemeral rain. And then something like the blue bush from Australia is very similar. You'll see it in our jojoba. You'll see it in a lot of plants where that's not exactly green. It has this little fluffy white, it's almost blue, but it's the little fluffy things are creating shade for itself, so all that furry leaf is protecting itself. And another thing is it's actually reflecting the sun back, so it's not taking the full heat. And so when you kind of start to look at desert plants and appreciate all the ways that they have adapted to their conditions, it's beautiful, and it's a story of their climate and their landscapes. So when we review some of the pretty photos we saw before, something like the boojum, which is a succulent with a codex, so it holds water in its entire being and slowly uses it. It also goes absolutely dormant in the summer. We can't put an ounce of water on it in the summer because it wants to grow in the winter and in the summer not be bothered. Whereas it in Baja, that's its natural condition. It doesn't get and it's also on the hills of Baja and really sandy soil. So it's not as worried about a big rain deluge because it's not going to sit in soaking water. Something like the cardone, which that's a big flower. There's a lot of cactus that have huge showy flowers. Those flowers don't open up in the day and hang out. They open up at night, and they're white because they want to attract a nighttime pollinator. And that's the time when the desert landscape is alive. Whereas during the day, might not be a lot of things up and about eating and being busy, but so they've adapted to be pollinated by the things that are active, which is at night. Something like the quiver tree is from South Africa, and it is not adapted to frost. There are other aloes, arborescent aloes, that kind of get furry on the bottom and kind of like a palm tree. This one doesn't. And when we have frost, we have to go out and cover them. And when a succulent has damage, it's usually frost damage, taking the tip back, and that does not grow back. So it's something to know about your plants of like what can harm it, what do I have to watch for, so that you can enjoy and keep them in full health. And then yes, with some of the Australian trees, again the blue bush, but the really fine leaves that again aren't going to lose a lot of evaporation through transpiration. Something like a eucalyptus, huge deep roots. It also grows that bark that's a protectant through the summer and sloughs it off through the winter. And what is another feature? The flowers are fascinating. That I don't have a photo of it, but a lot of Australian flowers, when they set a seed, it's a really hard shell. And the reason for that is the Australian ecology depends on fire to break open that shell and so it can germinate. And so the plants have adapted. They said, okay, we wait until we have that fire year, and then we'll spread out, and the runoff and everything from the next season won't be being sucked up by all the little low brush stuff. I will get a chance to grow because I don't have competition this year because they burned. And that's kind of another adaptation that plants take to their environment. So now we're kind of review and if you guys have any questions, let me know. I am kind of trying to rush through it a little only because I know when it comes to landscape design or design in general, everyone has a different home and a different need. So I'd like to make as much time available so we can answer some individual questions. But if you have any kind of for the class questions, I'm game for that too. So for this, a colleague of mine, Lauren Reeves, who's also a landscape architect graduate, and I put together this kind of workshop a year ago, and we broke it up into kind of 5 steps. And the important thing, I think, for me to you, is that it's important to kind of go through these steps, and then you create your plant palette. Plant palette's at the end, because all the decisions you need to make about your home and the way you live helps inform what plant is chosen. And you don't start with the plant and then try to kind of figure out where it goes, which you can do that. But it's more valuable to you in your home if you think about how I want to live and what experience do I want to have, and then find the plants, because we have so many. We have so many plants that are adapted to the desert. We have so many native plants here. The Sonoran Desert is the most biodiverse desert in the world. We're adjacent to the Chihuahuan, that has great opportunities. We are able to support Australian plants and Mediterranean plants, and you have a wealth of choice. So there won't be a problem finding a plant The question is, what do you need a plant to do in your life? So the first step is to think about the vision, the who, what, when, and the where is your landscape. But who will you share your garden with? It might be the little pollinators you want to attract. It might be grandkids. It might be a dog. What do you want to do when you're in that space? Do you want to sit for hours, or you just want to look out at it from your kitchen window? When will you be in your garden? A lot of people are snowbirds, and it's a real consideration because the time of year you're here with us is the winter, which I know the weather is nice, but it's still our winter. So not all plants, especially native plants, are going to be showy at that time of year. And so that's why you might reach out to other parts of the world that have plants that can perform in the months that you're here so you can enjoy them. And then a big one is how involved do you want to be with the care and tending of your garden? And that goes back to thinking about, well, all plants have different needs depending on where they're from. So you might choose to have a garden that's lower maintenance, and you might choose more native plants for that reason. Or you might say, hey, my nephew loves to be out in the garden, and I don't mind having things that need a little more care because it's something we do together. So as an example, I myself am renovating a house. So I am skipping ahead of plumbing and electrical and all the things I should be doing and starting to vision my garden. And I am a one-person, one-dog household. I garden for a living, but I want to eat on my leisure time. And I also want guests. So I want to grow food, and I want to have company. And the part I didn't show is a photo of my house. I have two existing very large olive trees. So I've decided to just kind of take that as my step forward, and I'm just going to go to Mediterranean vibe in general. And that's kind of the depth that you need for your vision of just start thinking about who am I doing, or who am I spending time with, what am I doing in my space, and keep that in the back of your mind as we step through the other steps. Step 2 can be quite involved, which is site considerations. This is where, depending on what you're doing, this is where a landscape designer or a landscape architect may come in very handy. You see the photo on the top, and that is a very involved diagram of the space, of sun exposures, of wind, and they use the nice markers. Those are the Copic markers, I can tell. You can also just do a really quick sketch with just black and white paper and do one layer, sit down and say, where is my sun and shade? And then, and I pulled it out. This is your best friend when you're kind of trying to iterate ideas. Just trace paper. If you print out like a Google map of your yard or wherever it is you're designing, put that trace paper over it, draw your shade, grab another sheet of trace paper, draw your existing plants. A different one, you might draw the views you have that you want to maintain. And even the act of putting that all on paper helps bring it to mind as you move through the other steps. So this is my house example. I just kind of put like general diagrammatic shapes. I think the important thing for when you're doing design, some things like this, when you see the diagrams and the plan underneath and it's beautiful, you don't need to do that for design. What we do for design is trace paper and big blocky things with markers. And don't be intimidated by just getting your ideas out there in whatever way works. So for my example, for my house, I know my back door is the entrance I want to use all the time, so I have a kind of a long route circulation that I need to maintain. Majority of my yard is the north side of my yard, but the whole eastern side is next to my neighbor, who I am not a fan of. It's next to their driveway, and they fix their car all the time, and they smoke as they're doing it. And so like, I need to keep that in mind as I'm thinking about where I'm putting things and where I'll hang out. I'll mark down where the existing trees are. I'll mark down important utility that you need access to, whether it's irrigation or your electrical box or your air conditioning unit. Get those on paper as well while you're making these decisions so you don't compromise them later. And let's see, yeah, gate stores, dog door location, very important. My vision is my dog and me and guests for myself and my dog. So that dog door location is going to be busy. And because I've put that on my vision as a priority, I want to make sure I put it on my design as something I record. The orient your plant consistently, and that's kind of just your Google printout of your house or whatever you have. What I do when I'm sitting down to design is I'll tape that base map to my table and it's not moving. And then every sheet that I put on, I kind of mark up or north or whatever orientation works. But because my base map's not moving, I know that every sheet that I've made is going to line up together. And if I want to compare my shade with my dog circulation, I can kind of grab those two and look at them and think about what that means for the way I will live in that space. Step 3 is programming. There is a G in there. I don't know what happened to it. And again, big bubbles, big things. And we're trying not to get to the detail of plant yet, because this is the point where you're really thinking about, okay, my dogs have a way in, and I know not to be next to that neighbor, but what am I doing in my garden? Where am I going to grow the vegetables that I want to make dinner? Where am I going to have leisure time? How much space do I need to have a big dining table? Or how much space do I want to dedicate to a pollinator garden bed so that I'm getting the outcome and the garden that's serving my needs and my vision. And kind of, again, going back to the other steps, but just plant it in phases. Do a couple sheets at a time. Let it rest. Have a cup of coffee. There's a lot of kind of noodling that goes on with design. And as you have more experience, and if you do it all the time, it does become easier and quicker, and you kind of work your way through problems. But it's okay that you don't. There's always one that catches you and one that you really need to let sit. And you might end up with 2 or 3 bubble diagrams like this of your yard that really make sense to you. Really, yeah, this will work. It would really work if my lawn was over here and the patio was just a large one over here. But this makes sense too because of this. And you just give yourself the time and give yourself the grace to really consider before you do those investments. I think any plant is an investment. It's not that it's a huge financial investment necessarily, but it's an investment of time. It's an investment of water. And if you really want it to grow and thrive, you want to give the time to know that you're putting that plant somewhere that it's meaningful. Programming. So here's my example of programming for my yard. It's really obvious where I put my kitchen garden because I only have so many good sunny spaces. And it's really obvious where I'll do my seating with my dogs because I have a pre-existing patio. But these other things, where I want some foraging plants, where I want to do a shed, the hammock that I've decided is a absolute must. Those things have physical space that they take. And I can actually draw out the size of the hammock and start placing it really. I've moved beyond the bubble diagram. I kind of know it's going to be in this corner, but what does that look like? And so you can start going into some detail of space when you're doing programming because you're really identifying what it is you're doing in your garden and who you're sharing that space with. And that will help kind of inform and understand how much space is left for the plants, which we are finally getting to. We are starting by just choosing forms. And like I said, the arid landscapes, the Sonoran Desert, we have just an immense amount of choice for plants. So we don't really have to worry about being too prescriptive. We just want to think about, where do I want shade? Where do I want something to look at? Where do I want to screen that fence that I don't want to think about fixing yet? Or where, going way back to our site considerations, where's my view? Where's the place I'm going to do a focal point? And place those things in the plan now that you kind of understand the spaces and where they are. And one of the things I like to do at this point is, if you get a black and white photo of your garden, what you have, and you print it with high contrast, and you can do this right off your phone, you can once again go back to trace paper, or you can just pull up that photo on your iPad, so now your trace paper is backlit, and you can just start drawing blobs. Say, hey, okay, I want a tree over here, some bushes, I'd really like some ground cover, and you can start to see that three-dimensional space just by using a photo. And that helps kind of solidify what those form choices are, because it might make a lot of sense to do on your programming, your plan of, a forest of trees. Well, what does that look like when you're looking at it from your kitchen? Oh, I actually can't see out of these 10 trunks in front of me. Or you might say, oh, you know what, I'd rather I have more shade over there and less over here. And you can kind of start to see how those forms relate to each other. And now we can go on to the plant palette. And I think right plant, right place is a common term. You might have heard it before. And I like to just add to that and say right plant, right space. Make sure you're looking at the size of that full-grown plant and that it's getting the space it needs to be its like full display. A lot of times we can match a plant that, yeah, it will survive there, it'll do well there, but because it outgrows the confines of that space, it ends up being maintained in a way that's not fair to the plant and not fair to you, because it's not going to perform in the way you hope to. And that is, this is the part where I reiterate you can get native plants. You can just keep to Sonoran Desert native, which will likely perform the best in our climate because they've adapted to our climate. Again, it's worth going back and thinking about, where did they adapt in our climate? Did they adapt in our washes? Did they adapt in our bosques? Are they used to being really dry because they're kind of on the rocky hills? It's worth it to do that little bit of research of when you do native plants. It's not a blanket of anything native here will work. It's native things will likely succeed if I give them the conditions they're used to. You can also do desert adapted, and there's so many options with desert adapted. At this point in Arizona, we have a lot of understanding about how our desert adapted plants perform. When you look at our pamphlets that you got today, there's a lot of native stuff, and there's things that are kind of adjacent. So some of the salvias are probably from Chihuahua, but we know they perform well here, and we're able to say what the conditions are that they can grow. And I think the most important one, and it's not that I'm back to doing the plug for Boyce Thompson Arboretum. This is a plug for all local nurseries. When plants are grown in a place, they have adapted to our climate from the get-go. So many plants that you buy at Home Depot were grown in a greenhouse in California, and they get shipped here, and they look fantastic. And they're gonna die. Or they're going to immediately wilt and be miserable because they were not used to arid climate. And even if it's a native plant, you can have a globe mallow that someone grew in a greenhouse in California. If it grew up its whole time with that silver spoon in its mouth, it's going to wobble a little when it gets here. So I think the most important thing when choosing plants, whether it's native or desert adapted, is really to work with a nursery that's going to have something that's been grown here and adapted, so that you know that the plant you're getting is able to perform in these conditions. So this is my example of creating a plant palette for my house. It's a very small yard, and I know that I wanted a focal tree, a multi-trunked focal tree in the full afternoon sun that creates dappled shade. And I want that because I want to put my herbs underneath it, so I need somewhat of the shade in the summer. I know it can't be too large, and it's directly out of my kitchen, so I wanted something interesting. So I kind of broke it down of all the features I wanted of that tree, but if I say that sentence to a local nursery or a horticulturist, or to myself, immediately many options come up, because we have lots of options. We have native options, the palavrea and the desert willow and the ironwood. We have a Mediterranean option, the vitex, and then I can make that further choice of, okay, here's my good choices, and let me research into these trees, because I know this shape and this plant will perform in the condition that I am going to give it, and it's going to provide for me the vision that I want for my yard. And this is the point where you choose kind of your plant palette, after you've gone through those other steps and understand what it is you want that plant to perform. For myself, I am going to choose a vitex, because there's this wonderful variety at the Arboretum that has this lovely light leaf in the Wallace that I have been eyeing. So also, it's a Mediterranean tree, like the olive tree that's already in my yard, and as it ages, it gets this wonderful gnarled bark that's very similar to an olive bark. So I'm excited to see that grow and age and mature into that type of tree. And this is kind of, if you take away anything from this talk, it's help a local nursery be a better resource for you. Bring detail when you're trying to make these decisions, because they have a wealth of knowledge, and there's a lot of consideration that goes into choosing a plant, but they can't have the consideration of what your yard is and what your home needs. So that's, I think, the most important thing for designing your yard, is really thinking in detail for the needs of your plant palette. Other things to think of: what are your extremes, heat and frost? In the Arboretum, we have the Queen Creek that runs through our site. That's a cold sink. And so there are certain things we just cannot plant down in a cold sink, and we have to consider that. They will succeed and do wonderful up on a higher hill. It's also something that's listed on every plant, what its frost tolerance is. The plants don't list their heat tolerance. They list their frost tolerance. And there's a reason for that, because that's a really concerning point of failure for many plants. Their heat tolerance is kind of the zone or that they are in, but you can fudge that. But you can't fudge the frost. Another thing to consider is the phenology or the seasonality. This is the demonstration garden at the Arboretum. It's spectacular in November. I mean, even the sunflowers are still open at times. The insects and pollinators are going crazy. The Chinese pistache has turned colors. It is vibrant. It's not that great in March. And that's when a lot of our visitors are coming back and asking for things. It's like, you missed it. It was doing its thing a couple months ago. It's resting right now. But if you're a snowbird and your time that you're here in the desert is December through March, these plants aren't the right ones for you. They've gone dormant. Another thing to consider, and this was the example of right plant, right space. This Hesperaloe, it's a beautiful plant. It's showy all the time. It showed itself to the sidewalk and got hedge trimmed. And it's unfortunate, because there are varieties of succulents that are smaller that can be just as showy and just as impressive in that space, but they put a Hesperaloe there that spreads to like up to 4 feet wide. It was never going to succeed. It was always going to take over, as opposed to something like a lantana that's given lots of space to trail and to drape and to be its dramatic self. I particularly like this combo with the agave because all you'd need to do is water the lantana. It's slightly on the higher part of the hill. You irrigate the lantana, a little bit dribbles down to the agave, gets everything it needs, and you can kind of support two plants that have slightly different water needs and give them enough space to do so. And an important thing is pick plants that make you happy. Please do. We have so many options, and you always can. This is kind of going back to like the one takeaway I would hope you would get from this talk is when you're designing your landscape, you don't say, what tree should I get? You say, which tree do you recommend for this condition to provide shade at this time or this activity for this purpose, whatever that is. So what tree do you recommend for the south side of my house on the front yard to provide shade for my succulent plants, for me to look out my window? It just puts some context into what are the things that are important as you're making that choice. Another one we get is, I want a rainbow eucalyptus, or I want a plant that I'm familiar with and love from somewhere else. Why do you want that plant? What's the thing about that you miss? So I like the interesting bark of rainbow eucalyptus. Is there a desert adapted or native alternative that will do well in this condition? And if you start talking through your landscape in that way, there's so many resources that can help you find an answer to these questions. But those questions, you're just going to get more questions back at you. One of my favorite ones is, I want a tree that provides shade year-round and doesn't shed to put next to my pool. That tree exists, and that tree is an umbrella. So it's important to know. Bring a photo. You know, if you're working on a certain corner of your yard, take a photo, print it out, write your notes on it. Something that will be certain that you're kind of matching your needs. We have wonderful resources, we have books, we have professionals who can help you through that. But if you kind of keep those notes in front of you as you're combing through those resources, you'll get to an answer a lot quicker. Some shopping tips. If you have the time, if you buy smaller plants to put out in your yard, especially things that grow fast, buy the 1 gallon. You don't need to buy the 5 gallon. The 1 gallon will look like the 5 gallon next year. And what you get is a plant that adapted to where you planted it. It had more time to learn its natural drainage and send its roots out in the direction of the landscape you put it in. And it will always support itself longer and better because it could grow in the place. Buy local, I think, is important, but again, buy from local nurseries that are growing here locally, so you're getting a plant that has already adapted to our climate. Lots of information on a plant label itself, so it's not just the common name, it's also the Latin name. Very important because a lot of our common names are used over and over again. So if you Google chaparral sage, you're going to get a number of things, and they probably aren't going to be Salvia clevelandii. So it's important to kind of, as you're getting to the nitty-gritty of choosing plants, write down the Latin name too. You can search out more information on the Latin name that you can trust than the common name. It almost always labels the mature width and height. It might have something on there of its general water usage. A lot of these things kind of list them as like low, medium, high water usage. I personally have beef with this. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. My problem is, which page is it on? oh, it's actually, it might not be in here anymore. They used to have something called the K value for plants, and they give it a percentage. And the K value was what percentage of water does this need in comparison to turf grass in this climate? Well, and so that's how they would decide whether it was low, medium, or high. My problem with that, the K value was determined in the 80s by like a table of 6 people, and there was no scientific basis for it. And I used to just be so mad. I was like, why are you showing people the K value? But all of these resources are put together by professionals in the industry as guides for people to help, choose what plants are going to succeed and what plants you're prepared to care for. I think the next big talk by Arizona Water Company is going to be on irrigation. And if you guys aren't signed up for that, I suggest you do. I've never been to a bad talk about irrigation. There's always more information to learn. And even as someone who maybe doesn't maintain their irrigation, maybe that's something you pay a company to do, it's worth it to know how your irrigation is in your yard. Because if you're watering everything like it's K value 1 and giving it all sorts of water and not separating out your shrubs with your trees, you need to know that. You need to know that you can only bring in things that are getting a certain level of water or a certain frequency of water. That's a big thing that will come up with irrigation is frequency of watering is what changes seasonally, not the amount of water you put down. So we don't change, we don't change much the duration that we have irrigation on. We change how often we water as we're getting into the drier months. So it's worth it to know what your irrigation is and what your site can do when you're choosing plants. Looking at bloom time, being prepared for size, form, detritus, that's how messy is a tree, or how messy is a bush. It's good to know ahead of time that, hey, this is a deciduous tree and it makes a right old mess right at Thanksgiving and I'm okay with that. Or I'd rather have it be a weekly maintenance issue for my landscape crew, and that's what I value so that I get the same tree or plant that I can expect year round. Another reason to be prepared for kind of form and its bloom time is because we don't want our landscape crew coming in just as our Texas rain sage is going to open up to bloom and it gets hedge trimmed. Yeah. We don't actually want hedge trimming at all. No hedge trimming. Yeah. But it's important to know not to harm our plants just before they're about to do our show. So if you understand when they're where they are in their cycle, you can tailor the care to that. One of the ones that is shocking to me, a lot of people love the Texas mountain laurel we have at the Arboretum. It is a showy plant. It sets next year's bloom in the fall. So they have these little dangly things that are on the tree in November, December, and then they don't open up until March. If you had your crew come in and hedge the shape in February, they hedged your bloom right off. So we'll get people saying, oh, we bought this 5 years ago and it's never bloomed. So, how is it maintained? You have to understand what plants you have so that they can perform and you can enjoy them. And that's part of choosing your plant palette. And some other resources, some books. You guys have your handouts. I think the most important resource when you get down to the nitty-gritty is going to be the professionals at the nursery. But if you're kind of stuck, need some inspiration, books are a wonderful place. I have to say, our public libraries have like a giant row of gardening books. Do not sleep on public libraries. There's lots of options there. And let's see, yep. So this was kind of the end of the presentation, but it's kind of the beginning of thinking about your yards and for your gardening. To start, you can just jot down some words about what you want to accomplish and kind of go through the steps. but really kind of shift the mindset for design. It's really about asking yourself those questions of what is it that I want to feel and experience and enjoy in my landscape, and let that inform you on the process to choose a plant. That's it for me. I tried to leave a lot of time so individual questions can happen, because I know that's how this goes when it's a landscape design course. You all have kind of those little questions you'd like to ask. But is there anything to begin? Oh, I'll start from the right, Tom.
When you're picking out your plant palette for space, do you recommend overplanting to some degree, allowing for losses, or take the long view, plant, allow for growth, and then just replace them if they don't survive?
The second one. But I will say, if you're impatient for a display, nothing wrong with an annual. And getting like a little 6-pack of some annuals, put some geraniums out in that first year. You can also go for wildflower seed and see how that goes. But I definitely go for the long view. A lot of times when people come to me with, and actually it was an undergrad, I worked for someone who was doing new housing, and we were designing just the yards that were postage stamp yards, just scraped clean. What do you put in there? And people would say, well, what should I do? And I said, plant a tree. Like, if you need to sit and think about it for the rest, fine, but plant a tree right now and let that grow and let the shade it develops inform you going forward. Because, yeah, the best time to plant was yesterday, always. Your question?
You mentioned a kitchen garden.
Yes.
How do you do that?
I'm born and raised in Arizona. The way I do kitchen garden is I do my winter garden. I don't try for the summer garden. And for me, it will be a raised garden bed, so that actually, because the days are shorter in the winter, and I want it to be easy to tend to my kitchen garden, and it'll be a confined space, so I can't expand. But my favorite is little gem lettuce. I grow a whole bunch of that. And then at the end of the winter, kind of getting through the last frost, or as that garden's dying off, I'll almost always just plant a bunch of chilies, and that will get me through the summer. But that's just what I've learned of what I like, what food I like. But a winter kitchen garden is where it's at. The other part of my kitchen garden is citrus. And that's what holds me through the rest of the year, is I have a couple citrus trees. But you can always put a lemon in your cooking. And then herbs are a huge one that I enjoy, and that's kind of the perennials that kind of hold the shape of the garden when the rest looks not so great. I've given up on tomatoes. I'm done trying.
Yeah.
A small cherry tomato, or those little like pear-shaped ones, they do well for a while, but I just never find I get a big enough harvest to justify getting them full. So that's how I kitchen garden. Okay. Any other questions? Or oh yeah, we got more. Let's start in the back.
Say we have a design.
Mm-hmm.
Is the Arboretum set up for us to go and get some advice from you guys?
Yeah, so we sell plants, and we have full-time staff who work with the retail nursery. I think these ladies are familiar with Preston, who's our kind of nursery guru. And you can also, we have a phone line where you can call, and that goes to my colleague Stephen, unless he's out of the office and I hear it ring and I'll answer. We can answer some quick questions that way. We don't have a design team available at the Arboretum. Some larger nurseries will. They'll have a garden designer available if that's your interest, to get a little more professional help. You can also reach out to local landscape architects. There's firms that do the big stuff, and there's firms that do smaller residential stuff. It just kind of depends on your need and the scale and things like that. But quick questions will always be available at the Arboretum. Yes?
In the
trees. This isn't design, but do you have any good tips on how to keep the birds off of the oranges? To keep them from eating the oranges as they ripen?
No, but I've never known the birds to go for oranges first. Yeah,
My birds love our
they
oranges.
do. You know, we had
They're very sweet. They're very sweet oranges, and they don't bother the neighbor's oranges because those are juice oranges, but ours are.
They're the good stuff.
They're the good ones.
I don't, you know, one of the previous talks I did was with the Apache elders over in San Carlos, and we did this whole talk, and then the only question I got from the audience was, how do you keep the gopher population down? And the only answer I had was coyotes. So I don't think a coyote is going to help your orange tree, but it's a good question. I wouldn't have an answer for you. Maybe there's some deterrence or something that someone else might know, but myself, I don't.
Some strips of tinfoil or something.
Oh,
I did. I put tinfoil at every orange.
no.
They were still, I don't know if it's the hummingbirds. I kind of suspect them. They'll just get a hole in them, you know? And, or the woodpeckers or
Well, if you could find out who's doing it, maybe you can plant something they'd like instead.
Well, we have.
I don't know.
I was thinking about getting, like going to Goodwill or something and getting gauzy curtains and sewing them together and just throw over once.
Yeah, they have you have bird netting you can buy, and they sell it, and it's just like fabric that's all folded up in a very fine net. It should protect, unless they're really coming at it like a.
Where do you get that?
I've seen it at Ace. Yeah, online. Amazon will have it, but it's just called garden netting, bird netting, and it's a really thin, loose weave, not too expensive. You had a question.
I was at the Arboretum a couple weeks ago, and there was a section of all of the plants to buy.
Mhm.
It said not till the 15th.
That was for the plant sale, yeah.
Oh,
So
not because it would have.
no,
It couldn't have went in the
yeah,
ground.
no, yeah, and it
Starts Saturday or
Friday for the member preview, Saturday. Yeah, a lot of it is, and it's also because we don't have it priced yet. So like a section gets cartoned off because like they're not ready for sale.
Something you just didn't want planted yet?
No.
After that date, but.
We do try to, on our plant sale, do the more cactus and succulents in the spring, and then some of the more leafy things in the fall. Just because if we hold the salvias and whatnot, if we don't sell them and we have to hold them through the summer, that's really hard to do. So we try, and then the same thing with the cactus, we have to really worry about keeping them alive and beautiful, because we want the plants that we sell to be lovely and presentable. So we do kind of favor certain kinds of plants depending on which time of the year the plant sale is. But we would never not sell something. We would just give the advice of how to keep it alive. One of the things, like if you buy a cactus or succulent from us in the spring, even though it's fully adapted and able to handle the sun, we recommend covering it for that first summer. Just so while it's developing its roots and getting to know the ground it's in, it doesn't go into stress by also getting kind of sun scorched.
What do you cover them with?
Oh, just a light netting, a shade cloth.
Oh, really?
That's just a recommendation to help with plants that have just been transplanted. They're closer to being stressed, so we don't want anything to be stressed in a hot summer. But plants that are greener and leafier are not going to fare as well through the stress of the first summer. So if we can help it, we try to encourage cactus and succulents in the spring. But, yes?
Two questions. Is there a good reference for desert plant seasonality in their blossoms, so that if you want to have blossoms of different colors as much as possible throughout the year?
Yeah.
Specifically looking at the seasons that you can find it all in each plant.
Yeah.
Together.
There is, there's a number of resources. I actually think AZ Plant Lady online has a pretty good job where you can click through of kind of like bloom color and it'll populate. It's NWF, I think it's the National Wildlife, not the National Wildlife Foundation, I'll have to get back to you on that one. There is something else that specifically kind of catalogs the phenology of plants.
Right.
And it's not on the top of my head.
For exactly what you want to do, and
Mm-hmm.
go like, is that all going to bloom at one time? and
Right.
Be done, or can I
Mm-hmm.
space that out, make some other decisions?
Yeah, that would,
I'll check out the
Yeah.
plant lady.
yeah, I think her website's pretty good for that. And then I'll try to get back to you on the phenology one. That's a little more science intense, but I think you can handle it, Tom. Yeah.
What is the story with grubs?
Yeah, your opinion of planting in the ground versus in a pot?
Ground.
Ground?
Yeah.
Is there anything, if
Uh,
you're going to use a pot, is there anything special you need to do?
The reason I prefer the ground is just that the roots are, as they get deeper in the ground, they're insulated. And in a pot, they're always going to be slightly exposed to heat extremes. So, and it kind of helps. It keeps a plant, able to remain in that pot because it's not going to extend beyond it unless it's very rigorous, which those exist. But I always find plants perform better in the ground because they can kind of get to know their dirt, get to know their nutrients. They're not going to run out of nutrients because the soil is regenerating itself in a way that pot soil can't necessarily do. So that's my recommendation if it's possible. The reason you do things in pots is if you know that they can't handle the summer sun or frost and you want them to be transferable. I think both have a place in a landscape, but if I could choose one or the other, I would always choose to put it in the ground.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, what is the story with grubs? I bought some plants from nursery, and when we planted it, there was big grubs.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Did you shake them out?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's good.
My question is, and then with the neighbor, there was a big agave falling down, and people told me that's because of the grubs.
The agave beetle is something to.
And how can you do something to avoid that your plants are being attacked in your yard, or what is that?
Well, there's a couple things. One, a healthy plant is less likely to be attacked by a pest. So have healthy plants. Another thing is and we don't use herbicide or pesticide at the Arboretum, but we also are developing a landscape and valuing its habitat. So if we have a couple things die and decay, that's okay, because that's a house for a bug. So we're encouraging that. So we're in a different place than a residential landscape. But if you know that you have an infestation, cut it out, remove it as quickly as you can so it doesn't spread. Wash your tools or make sure that the people who are tending to your landscape are cleaning their tools. So in case it's like a fungal infection or something, you're not putting it on every branch. And then if you wanted to treat and kind of protect your agave or something, I'd suggest going to a nursery and seeing what they recommend. I really don't have a lot of knowledge in that, but it's because of most of my work is not doing that and finding ways to not treat in that way. But I think the most important thing
No,
for...
I don't want to treat. I want to, where do they come from? Are my plants are going to be attacked by grubs, or how do I know that? Or
Yeah,
where did this come from?
the agave beetle, for instance, is native, so it exists.
Okay.
And the healthier plants are less likely to be victim. But because it's in the neighborhood, because it's the neighbor's yard, they're present, and you can either kind of pesticide, herbicide treat it, or you can just watch, make sure you're not getting any signs of stress. And something with a succulent is nice is depending on the size of the agave, I don't know what kind of agave this is, but you can just dig them up and check to make sure there's no health condition and get them right back in the ground if you're concerned. But that's kind of the extreme step to take, because then you're putting that agave in stress. But for certainty, and like if you suspect it, it's better to do that check to see if it has an infection and save the rest of them if it does. That's one technique that we do a lot. We do it a lot with our aloes. We have a horrible aloe mite infestation, and to apply miticide, we'd have to dig the aloe up and dip it and then put it back up. So what we've done instead is we've dug the aloes up that are really valuable and precious and rare and removed them from the regions that have presence of mites, so we don't put them at risk. Yes?
What's your opinion of the Arizona Master Gardener program?
We love it. Okay. Yeah. My mom went through it, I think when I was in high school, and I was in middle school, but it was really influential for me because it's really comprehensive. I love that they cover things like soil, as well as kind of plant phenology, and what do you guys have, like 12 topics? It's quite a few. And I really appreciate that it's not like a hobbyist gardening, it's a real science of gardening, and that's always valuable. And I think that informs design, it informs the way we talk about our landscape, but it's also just really valuable in the Arboretum in general to have people of that kind of knowledge around. Lovely. So thank you all who are master gardeners. I see some around. Anyone else? Yes.
That boogum tree?
The boojum, yes.
Boojum?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that outside the Arboretum? Are they?
I don't see them often out in the landscape. I know the Desert Botanical Garden has quite the specimens to be seen. It's we do, and they sell out almost immediately. It's a first thing that and the adeniums. It's like Friday, the first day of the Desert Rose. Yeah, the Friday, the first day of plant sale, they sell out. They are exceptionally slow growing. So we sell this, and I don't know that I've ever been updated to see one that's this, but we sell some every year. But they are very slow growing, and I think a lot of, yes, oh yeah.
Very expensive. You
Yeah.
can buy the.
Mm-hmm. I think once they start getting into the foot height, I think it's something like $500 a foot, and then once you get to a certain age, it's like a grand plus a foot. I mean, they are a pricey plant.
With the fire stick, what is this? Fire stick, you see this often here growing. It's not native, is it?
No, a fire stick is a euphorbia. The interesting thing about the fire stick is it gets the color in the cold. So that really showy fire stick is in the winter.
I read that they are in distress when they have that color.
Yeah, they are, and that's the. It's just there. Anytime something stops being green, it stopped trying to photosynthesize. It stopped trying to do the work. So it kind of pulled back, turned red, turned orange, but then we covet it for its distress.
And you should water this? Is that true?
You can water them, but I've seen some huge ones, but because it's a euphorbia and it's a succulent, you don't want to keep it wet. You definitely want to dry it out between. Yes?
Also, those fire sticks, they're very toxic, so you gotta be careful when you're
Cutting them. Yeah.
blanket.
Yeah,
You wear gloves and long sleeves.
all euphorbia, and there's quite a few. One of the ones that's most common you see in the landscapes now, it's called gopher plant, and it's really cool because it kind of, the ends have these like lime green puffs in the spring, and they're beautiful. And people are putting them out in their landscape, like, with the lantana and but it's still a euphorbia, and you can go blind from getting that sap on your hand and into your eye. Yeah, and that goes back to understanding the plant you're getting so that you can care for it responsibly. Yeah. How about you two? You've been very quiet.
We're absorbing everything. We just moved here in the fall
Oh, okay.
from the Midwest.
Yeah,
So,
the plants are, except that she likes palm trees, and is there any chance of us succeeding with planting one?
A palm tree is a giant grass. I don't recommend grasses at all. Well, there's some nice other kinds of grasses, but you would very much succeed planting a palm tree. The only thing is, because it's a grass, it needs water and water and water. So that's what you need to know if you make that investment. And that things that you grow next to it probably won't need as much water, so just kind of isolate its watering irrigation and make sure it's not draining down into agaves or something, because they don't want to be soaking wet. But yeah, you can have a palm tree.
and the fire stick, is that only toxic when you cut it or when you physically touch the exterior of the plant?
When you cut it. Yeah, the white milky sap in a euphorbia is the thing that's toxic. Okay? Yes?
Can I make a local plug? Tom McDonald, he usually comes to these meetings. He's a local, he's the founder of Smiling Dog Landscaping. And he's got a home on Cloudview, and he has a nursery there of native plants. So he's an excellent resource locally if you want to know about plants, and he propagates a lot of plants there that you can purchase as well.
Where is this thing located?
He's out off of, you know where Cloudview is?
On the way to Petroglyph Trail.
You know where the hieroglyphic trailhead is?
Oh, yeah.
That's Cloudview. So if you go up, instead of taking a right, so you go to the trailhead, you go left. And it's hard to say out there, because there's not a lot of numbers on houses.
Yeah.
But he lives off in that area. You could give him a call.
Yeah, Smiling Dog Landscapes. It's a memorable name, that helps. Smiling Dog, yeah. Okay. Anyone else, or we're good?
Cool. Well, if you guys have any other questions, am I able to share your contact information?
Yes. Yeah. And then I think I had my email at the beginning, and I should have just brought cards if I had thought about it. But she'll email you my contact information, and happy to help. Thank you.
Also, we are ready for the raffle. So we did a random number generator and selected, your odds are pretty good. We have 5 things we're giving away, and there's 11 people here. So number 1 is Debbie Schmidt. Debbie? Okay, come over here. You can pick one of either 3 plants, or you can get 2 passes to the Arboretum. So yeah, you can have your pick. And then up next is Louise.
Hey.
Come on up, Louise. All of these 3 plants are desert adapted, so they'll do well in the environment.
Oh, insider tip on the Arboretum, if you've ever visited our desert tortoises, Thelma and Louise.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Our desert tortoises at the Arboretum are Thelma and Louise, so you have a namesake tortoise. Yeah. They just woke up this week, so if you stop by to visit. They're at the end of the Chihuahuan loop. Like, you go all the way to the last loop, and that's where they are.
Tiffany? Toliwa? Come on up, and you can get 2 free passes to the Arboretum if you want to. Or a plant. And then we also have, let's see, what have we got here? Thomas? Do you want a plant? You can get a plant or passes to the Arboretum if you want. And then the last one is Cynthia.
Hey.
Come on up.
Wow, Cynthia, you got the agave. That's nice.
Ferdinand agave left.
Beautiful. And it has like 3 pups on it, so you could put dibs in.
Oh, I love
That's
Ferdinand.
nice.